Good, thank you. I really do feel it's an honor tonight to have the opportunity to present to you from this standpoint. This is a topic that I feel is really important as producers, both experienced and those with less experience in relationship to going through this process of having calves be born. It's such a wonderful time, and we want it to be a successful time for you as you're going through it. I specifically remember several situations with my mother going out to check cows at night to be sure that they're going well. And not always is it going along perfectly, but certain instances when we would have everything assembled just right, especially as the calving season got further into it, having everything just work together as a clock would work really made it a lot more fun. And even those 2 a.m. checks can be successful for you and allow you to get out there, get that calf prepped and ready and going with mom, and then allow you to get back to bed in relationship to that. So probably the first thing that I would recommend to include in your calving kit would be a very, very nice warm set of clothes. Today it's especially important in regards to our temperatures, and I hope there are only a few of you that are actually calving at this point in time. But with that in mind, it's a lot easier to be patient. I am not one of those people typically, but it's a lot easier to be patient as you're waiting for a mom to progress in this process if you're warm enough. In my particular case, I like using bib overalls instead of and a coat, because that gives you the opportunity to take your coat off if you need to, only when it's necessary to actually put on a sleeve. In my case, I have fairly small arms, but those of you that have larger arms, it's very difficult if you have all of those extra layers on to actually enter the cow if that is necessary. To begin, I like to have my kit assembled in a bucket. The bucket is important from the standpoint of having warm water. I utilize with my water some Novacin or some other antibacterial. Kitchen soap works, Novacin works. Those particular products, anything that you really utilize on your hands for washing your hands is probably okay along those lines. And so get a solution in that bucket and make sure that it is adequately hot, but not that it will burn you and or the cow in that respect. Inside of that bucket, I like to have it in a bucket so that it's easy to grab and go. Otherwise, you get in a situation where it's not assembled. And so as I look inside this bucket, first thing is I have the OB chain. Some people like having 2 OB chains. I prefer to have one long 60-inch. Otherwise, you can get 30-inch. And one thing that I always tell people, be aware and try it out so that you understand how to quickly get a loop made to go over the foot of that calf. And I'm sure that either Dr. Tony or Dr. Joe, when they go through the calving, assisting calving, will go through that as well. But I think it's important to practice that, especially for folks that haven't done it very often, to be able to figure out how to do that. Some people like OB straps instead. If that is the case, it is advantageous to also be sure to put some lubricant on that strap so that it slides easy. And sometimes it's actually a little more difficult with the strap to be able to get that around that foot. So that is one thing. In my case, I always buy an extra or keep an extra in the house, because if this was to fall in the straw at night or into the snowbank, which has been known to happen, it sometimes is difficult to locate that, and it's a lot easier to have one. And they're only about $8, so it's great to have that extra on hand. I like to have a large roll of paper towels with me, especially to clean off the vulva of the cow if it is necessary to go inside. It's just a really good way in which to keep things a little bit more sanitary in relationship to that. And so having that roll of towels is a great way in which to do that. I always have OB gloves. These here are just regular plastic gloves. They will go ahead and slide on all the way up to your shoulder. Some people like to utilize a clip on them so that they clip onto your actual coat or to your overalls to keep them up as you're doing that. And then something that I used to be less concerned about using, but I think is a really, really critical thing. And actually my veterinarian has done a great job educating me about this. Use plenty of OB lube. I always like to keep my OB lube. I buy it in gallon containers, but then I utilize bottles, and I always try to keep an extra one on hand because it seems as if when I utilize it, I tend to forget it outside, and it doesn't come out of the bottle very well when it's frozen in these sort of temperatures. So that is something that I would encourage you to keep it in smaller bottles. It also, once it's been frozen, it doesn't work quite as well as you would normally anticipate it to. A new type of lube that I have recently come across is called JB lube or J lube. And what is nice about this is just a powder, and this particular product won't freeze. You just shake it on your hand, and as the moisture from the cow gets on it, it gets very, very slippery. And so that'll be really critical as you are trying to lube that cow up and allow that calf to slide out of that birth canal. And I am sure that our veterinarians, as they come onto this series, will also go through that as well. So I have now started to keep this also on hand as part of that as well. In my case, I also have a snare. This is especially important if you've got a calf where the head continues to fall back, so you can put the snare in essence behind its ear and then put this into the mouth, and then that can be utilized to direct that calf into the birth canal so that the calf is presented with two front feet and the mouth or the head in between the feet of that animal. I keep a stainless steel scissors in the kit as well. That is in case you need to cut the umbilical cord shorter. In that particular case, you can utilize this. Usually I don't have to do that. And I just treat it with iodine, and that iodine treatment will help to dry that umbilical cord up quicker and minimize the potential risk of bacteria going up that umbilical cord specifically. And so that is something. If you are having problems with the umbilical cord not stopping the bleeding from that, sometimes it has been suggested to utilize something like dental floss in relationship to that, and you can tie that off and allow that to over time dry up and fall off from that standpoint. In addition to that, and Marie, I also have a calf puller, a little too high. In my case, the calf puller, I have a commercial calf puller. With that particular product, it liked to bite my hands as I was using it. And so with that in mind, I have been able to have my father, he put this together. It's just about 9-foot pipe with a boat winch on the one end. It uses a pulley system and a hook on it. And as you can see, this is something that I have to get done in preparation for calving season coming up for me. My rope broke last calving season on the last calf that we utilized it on. And so I need to replace that rope as it has become frayed and weathered over time. It's a little bit heavy, but it is something that I've really grown to appreciate. I personally don't utilize handles. A lot of people do. They're just D handles that hook into the chain. And the primary reason is I had a bad situation where I was attempting to pull a calf by myself and actually pulled a chest muscle in that process. And so since then, I utilize the calf puller even on easy pulls. In this particular case, this puller takes a while to crank that rope up. And that's really kind of a good thing because we don't want to pull that calf out too quickly in that process. It allows that cow to help you and assist with that process. And that's actually good for her in relationship to that. So that is something that, that I'm sure that Dr. Tony will talk about as we go through that process. So that is the primary components of the actual kit that we go out to the barn or field with in relationship to that, the components that are needed in that process. In addition to that, some of the components that I like to keep on hand and utilize fairly regularly. You can get or utilize colostrum in the frozen form, or also you can purchase a supplement or complete colostrum replacement. These here are in regards to quality, they look at how many IgGs or grams of immunoglobulin that they have in them. In most cases, if your cows are doing their job, just a supplement is adequate in relationship to that. And I will tell you that in my case, with working full-time off of the farm, I utilize supplement very liberally. A container like this is maybe $15, $18, something along those lines. And if I have a calf that is born in the morning and I know that I won't have the opportunity to be with it all day, I will take and fill my esophageal tube feeder about half full, and that will give them a shot of nutrient into their bellies, and it makes them more interested in getting up and suckling. I usually use about a half of container of one of these supplements, and I like to use the supplement right away because it gives them part of that IgG that is beneficial for actually getting that animal up and going. I prefer to do the esophageal feeder. Otherwise, if you do utilize a calf bottle, then the calf will tend to come to you to find that bottle again. And I really want her to focus on mom in relationship to going through that process. When filling this up, make sure that the temperature of that water that you're mixing with your supplement is about the same temperature that is comfortable for you. About 100 degrees is kind of an ideal temperature. And then as you're utilizing the tube feeder, you want to put that in and let it naturally flow into that body of that calf. One thing that I'm really critical of, and I think it's really important, is to rub the tube feeder frequently, not only to keep it clean, but also to check to see if the teeth of the calf have chaffed at, because many times with the smaller calves, their esophagus is small enough that it can actually cut them. And so I think that it's really critical to check that. And then another trick that I always utilize is before I go to tube the calf, I always dip the actual feeding tube into the liquid, and that will basically lubricate that up. And then I turn it on and keep that down until you have it into the calf before you lift it up, because otherwise it can go down into the lungs, and that's a really bad situation. I personally like the esophageal feeders that have the hard bulb on the end, because that will help to keep it from going down into the lungs and direct it better down into the stomach in relationship to that. In addition to that, I think it's really important for you to have a good relationship with your veterinarian. And the big reason that it's important to go through this process is to have a better understanding of what sort of things you should maybe consider giving the calf at birth. In our particular region, it's really critical that we give the calves a shot of vitamin E and selenium, because our region is very deficient in selenium. So that means not only is the cow's milk deficient, the feed that we're feeding the cows is deficient, and even the soil, if they do ingest some soil, is deficient in selenium and vitamin E. And so it's really critical to give those calves that shot at birth and be well aware of that. In addition to that, vitamin A and D is another thing that my veterinarian that I work with suggests giving. And then also we utilize a fair amount of vitamin B complex. In the case of vitamin B, it's readily available to you from most places. You can purchase it. But vitamin B is also a great stimulant of appetite. And sometimes if those calves are a little sluggish, it's really advantageous to stimulate that appetite so that they're hungry and they get up and go to mom in relationship to that. Now, if we have problems with calves not mothering up, another component that that we try on our farm, and soon you will have access to a nice fact sheet that we have put together in relationship to putting together calving kits. On there, it suggests things like Orf No More, which is a supplement that is high in ammonia. That particular product, it's encouraged to actually place it on the cow's nose and to wet the calf and get a liberal application on that calf as well. There's another product that one of my neighbors had that I borrowed for tonight's presentation called Mother Up. Oftentimes I utilize some sweeter feed like corn distiller's grain, something that is very palatable for the cow. Dump that on the calf, and oftentimes that will help with the mothering up, as well as looking at perhaps bringing your family dog into that environment as long as it is safe for the calf and for your dog and yourself. That sometimes can encourage cows to mother up to that calf, and she'll look at protecting that calf from that dog in that particular case. In addition to that, I think it's, and our next session will go into that. Both Tara and Stacy will talk about it. I utilize a red book to keep track of things like birth weights and who the dam is, who the sire is, what the date was, what date they were born. And then also you can keep track of other items that they'll talk much more extensively about. In addition to that, I think tagging animals is critical. It might not be quite so critical in a smaller herd, but once you get over about 10 head, having tags on those calves, it allows you to keep track of who the dam is for each of the calves, really critical. There are many different styles of tags and taggers. This is a button style as compared to all one-piece style. Z-tag versus all flex or do flex or Y-tex tags. In this case, these come pre-numbered, like this here one, if you prefer that, or if you prefer to put your own numbers on there, this is a blank panel tag, and there are special markers that you need to utilize to write on them if you want the actual writing to last. It's really critical to use the appropriate marker for the appropriate tag, as it tends to work better on the particular tag type that they have. I like using the open panel tags so that I can write whatever number on there in our operation. And then I also find that we not only write the calf number on the bottom, but we also put that cow number on the top, and that's helpful to be able to quickly track the cow to the calf. I utilize different colors for steers and heifers, and I think that is also valuable from the standpoint of allowing you to sort animals pretty quickly. In addition to that, I think syringes are important, disposable, anywhere from 3 to 10 cc's. Needles, you should utilize smaller 18 gauge needles by about 1 inch for calves. And then also it's important to have cow needles on hand, either 1 inch long by 16 gauge or 1.5 inches by 16, depending on if you need to do sub-Q versus IM injections from that standpoint. Those are the things that I would consider the most critical. There are other types of medicines, of course, to have on hand for more advanced operations. And you will find that on this fact sheet that we will get out to you as we move through this series. And at this point, I would like to open it up for questions. If there's been any questions, or if there's questions folks have at this point, go ahead and please ask away.
Thank you, Troy. I've got a question here in the chat box. How do you know that the esophageal tube feeder has been inserted into the esophagus, stomach, as opposed to the trachea, lungs?
There is some technique to that. Probably the best one is to have the calf setting up between your legs, kind of like how a dog sits up on its haunches. And then I always put it in from the right side. I try to keep this tube very flexible. In fact, this one is getting a little bit stiff, and so I think I will be replacing it. And as you insert it, to have that lubricated is really critical. What I always do is I do watch to see if there's any bubbles above and beyond natural flow of that fluid down into that calf. And so those are the things that really identify for me successfully getting that into that calf. Generally speaking, they will immediately start gasping, and with this type of feeder, if you get to the point where you're going down the trachea, they will fight you in relationship to that.
Along with that,
Other questions?
sorry, I was gonna say, along with that question, how long do you wait if it doesn't seem like the, colostrum, milk replace, or whatever what kind of fluid you're tubing with? How long do you wait to say that the stomach just isn't going to take anymore? What if you feel like it's just too slow and not going down very fast?
So a couple of things that I have found is if you've inserted it too far, the stomach tissue will actually block off the end of the tube, similar to this, and it won't flow. And so I often will put it in and then I'll pull it up maybe an inch or inch and a half and wait for that to flow. The worst thing that you can do in relationship to doing a tube feeding like this is if you have the tube feeder, it's inserted into the calf, you do not want to give this a squeeze, because if you give this a squeeze, it will flow and potentially backflow up to the point where it can go down into the lungs. And so let it naturally flow down. In this particular one, if it's cold out, the actual container itself is hard enough that it won't collapse. And so in some cases, I crack the threads on it to allow natural venting to occur, and it'll go down. I would prefer that people would tube them a little bit more frequently with smaller quantities. I will be very interested to hear what our veterinarians that will be part of this series will say about that. But in my case, I'd much rather give them a half a dose in morning and half a dose in the afternoon as compared to overdoing it and causing it to overflow and go into the lungs from that standpoint.
And a full calf doesn't want to nurse either.
Exactly. Yep.
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 Another question along those lines, Troy. What is your preferred milk replacer when the cow absolutely doesn't work?
So when looking at milk replacers, there are a few characteristics that I really highly recommend focusing on. First of all, it should be actual milk protein, not plant protein. Calves at that age can't digest plant protein very well, and oftentimes the calves will not be thrifty. And especially for that first 3 to 4 week period, it's really critical to focus on animal-based protein in relationship to that. In addition to that, we want to look at a milk replacer of at least 20% protein, 20% fat. And so it's critical to find ones that are, once again, that animal-based protein and fat as your milk replacer. In many cases, at least in the dairy industry, they tend to migrate quite quickly over to cool water instead of warm water. If you're hoping to actually graft that calf onto a cow, I would highly suggest that you keep that milk replacer as warm as compared to transitioning it to cold, because that calf won't want to go onto warm milk as easily as you're trying to graft that calf onto a different cow. So that would be just a suggestion that unfortunately, I've made that mistake, and it's probably not your best move in relationship to that.
Troy, can you talk a little bit about, I got another question about what kind of iodine do you recommend? I know there's several different options. What kind do you is best?
So in relationship to that, usually I like to use a fairly dilute 7% sort of solution in relationship to iodine. With that, it's still strong enough that it causes that navel cord to dry up fairly quickly. And with that in mind, that's really the key in relationship to what its best advantage is. Some people utilize that as a disinfectant. I prefer some of these other options, soaps and what have you, just because it tends to stain everything in relationship to your hands and clothing and that sort of stuff. And so I don't especially like utilizing it just as the disinfectant. Now, if that was the only thing I had, I probably would, but in reality, I try to keep other things on hand.
So Troy, there was another question in the chat. How often did your mom visit the calving barn each night?
So I think that's really a function of a few different things. When it's this cold out, I think that you should be visiting them probably about every 2 hours in relationship to going out, checking on them. We want to make sure that those calves are up and going, dried off in a clean area so that they don't get contaminated in relationship to fecal material, either on the udder of the cow, mud on the cow, or just simply them licking on dirty surfaces. That is really a direct mechanism for them to take in those bacteria, and that's not good. There are several camera systems out there that allow you to watch from the comfort of your home. In some cases, I've seen several folks that they have cow TV on all the time. Cow TV not only includes visual cameras, but also has audio. And you can really tell a lot by that audio component as well. Interestingly enough, today I did see a device called Moo Call. And basically that is a device that you put on the tail of the cow. And I think it actually identifies the angle at which the cow is holding her tail. It has a GPS tracker in it as well. And so if your cows aren't in a yard or a pasture and they can be out on the range, it would help you to identify. And when that cow is suspected of going into labor, it texts you and tells you that Josie or Jasper or Donna are having their calf. And so I thought that was a pretty cool device. It's about $350. It is reusable from year to year or cow to cow. So if you had 10 of them, you could put them on the 10 cows that are most close to calving, and it would be able to help you identify when she's about to calf that way.
It also measures the contractions. It can feel that I guess when they have a contraction, it can feel that within the tail. I would caution that you need to be careful not to get the device on too tight because it can actually restrict blood flow within the tail. So make sure you give them enough room without losing it.
Thank you, Melissa. Have you utilized those, Melissa?
We did. They worked really well. We had a few false alarms, but for somebody who is working off the farm and we weren't going to spend that kind of money, obviously, on every single female in the herd, but it made a lot of sense for those few that, maybe that they're going to come with a bigger calf, or maybe it's a heifer. You want to be sure that you're home when she's calving. When she starts having contractions, it'll send you, like you said, an email and a text alert. So if you're, reasonably close, you can get home and help them out. So
Excellent.
it was money well spent. We don't use it all the time, but yep.
And then there's an annual fee with that as well?
There is. I believe it's like $40, I think, to get the renewal fee to be a part of the software program. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. You have to have a good internet connection, or at least a good signal, like a cell phone signal.
Good.
Also, I got another question, Troy. Have you ever tried molasses on the backs of calves instead of the other products that you talked about?
Yes. Yep. It is a good option as long as the animals are used to utilizing or having molasses in their feed, or if they're used to licking on a protein molasses lick. Those work really well. Actually, they also work really well to put some of these powder products on. If you put the molasses on the calf, it's really sticky, and then it will keep the powder product on as well. Some of this stuff is hit and miss, I'll be honest. Sometimes you will have all of the cows in the area claiming that calf, and the next time it's like it doesn't work at all. And I haven't figured out exactly why, but that is something that is, that's the sort of experiences I've had with it.
So we're approaching time, but I think we have enough time for a couple more questions. One in the chat was, during cold weather, would you recommend removing a calf to a warm environment to dry off? If so, how long before the calf needs to go back out to the cow so she doesn't reject the calf?
So another component that I didn't talk about is the aspects of a warming box. They are nice because in some cases the warming box is close enough to the maternity pen that it gives you a chance to have her be able to smell that calf through a window. So that is nice. But if you have to remove that calf, usually I try to get that calf back out to mom, at least for a short period of time, within about hours of when you've removed it. It's usually a good idea to have that cow mother up well and actually have her in a maternity pen of some sort, so she realizes that that's her space. Otherwise, what will happen is she'll tend to go back and forth between where she calved and maybe that maternity pen and kind of get bewildered in that process. Whereas if you bring her into that maternity pen, lock her in that maternity pen, give her a chance to mother up well to that calf, then take the calf away to dry it off, it will tend to give her the peace of mind that that's where she needs to be with that particular calf. With maternity pens, I would probably recommend at least 10 foot by 10 foot, 12 by 12, or about 140 square feet is about the right size. If you go much smaller than that, there's the risk that that cow could step on that calf. There is a risk of, even at 140 square feet, not being big enough, but it becomes less and less once you get over about 100 square feet.
Troy, can you, what do you think is the best way to weigh a calf at birth?
I actually like the sling that goes under the belly. And with that particular case, I really like the style where it's basically on a T handle and a spring scale where you hook it onto that sling and then tip the calf or the T handle up. It lifts the calf up off the ground and gives you the reading. That works out best for us out in kind of what I'd consider pasture calving. If you're in an area where it's a typical calving barn where everything is kind of contained within that barn, then the style where you actually put them into a little calf stall near the maternity pens works really, really well. And I would probably say that that's probably a little bit more accurate than the spring scale, if that is the most critical component that you're trying to evaluate.
Okay. If you know, Troy, that a calf is coming backwards, any suggestions on what is kind of your protocol for how you handle that?
So backwards calves, generally speaking, if the nose is there and the toenails are up, well, if the nose is there, obviously you know it's coming forward. But if the toenails are up, it is suggestive that that calf is coming the correct way. If the toenails are down, that is suggesting that it's coming backwards. And oftentimes you will get the legs backwards protruding further. In my particular case, generally speaking, we go ahead and make sure that the tail is coming adequately. And if the cow is large enough to handle the delivery in a posterior presentation appropriately, we go ahead and actually pull that calf backwards. As we pull that calf, the other thing about that is we do hold that calf up, and then we utilize some clean straw or hay to get in the nostrils so that, and we don't ram it up in there, but tickle the nose. And oftentimes that tickling will cause it to sneeze and expel any of the gook that it may have tried to ingest as it is coming out backwards once the umbilical has torn away from the inside of the uterus. So with that in mind, you hold it up and the natural flow of the drainage will help. But then in addition to that, go ahead and tickle the nose to get it to sneeze or blow in relationship to that. Another component of that is with that sort of presentation, being able to retain her, contain her, putting her in a chute or in a head gate. A few things that I'd recommend is having a head gate that isn't real tight against the side of her neck, so that if she does lay down in the head gate, that it doesn't cut off the airflow to her lungs is a critical component. I like the side where you can open the side, not so that you can swing, but at least lay down adequately, because you want that natural flow of the curve with that calf coming out to be able to occur. And you would like her to lay on her right side, in essence, putting pressure on that baby so that there's more of a natural push to help her in that presentation of that calf, ideally.
I think I see one more question here for you, Troy. How long in advance do you recommend that bee producers should be putting together this calving kit before they start?
Thank you. I would recommend going ahead and getting this together about a month in advance, at least 4 weeks, because in some cases with heifers, they tend to calve anywhere from 10 to 14 days early. And by having this kit all together in advance of that, you will impact the survivability of your calf. Generally speaking, by having this put together, it mentally prepares you so you know that you should be out there checking those animals more frequently, and prepares you for that early born calf that often will come and catch people off guard. I talk to many beef producers, and they always say, They tend to lose a calf in the first 5 to 10 calves that are born. And then a majority of the rest of the season, they don't lose any. And so it's very frustrating as you're going through that starting process when you do lose a calf. And so if you can have something like this all put together, assembled, ready to go, ready to grab at just a moment's notice. And oftentimes when this is happening, we need help. And so if you can direct your child or your spouse to exactly where it is, it also helps them to be happier in the process as well. So.
One more quick question, Troy. Go to the farm supply store and you see 2 bags that are sitting there on the shelf. Colostrum supplement versus colostrum replacement. What is the difference and which one do I want to buy?
So from my point of view, I do utilize the supplement, but I use it very, very liberally in relationship to that. If you have a calf that was born to a cow, maybe she's a heifer, maybe she's really thin from the big calf that she produced the last year, and the quality of her colostrum is not very good, then it might be worth having the actual replacement on hand. The replacement is significantly more expensive, more than $30 per bag. It does have a lot more IgGs in it, like triple the amount, and that can be advantageous for that calf to get it up and going. As long as you get good quality colostrum or harvest good quality colostrum from some of your other cows, it can be frozen and that can be advantageous. But one thing about frozen colostrum, it's best not to microwave it as you bring it back to life or prepare it for that. So just realize it's going to take you a little time to get that thawed out and up to temperature before you want to present that to the calf.
Unless there are, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I think with that, Troy, thank you very much. Unless you have something else to add.
Yes, I would like to thank everybody for coming this evening and giving me the opportunity to go through this. By all means, I'd be more than happy to answer further questions about putting this stuff together. And or once you do get this fact sheet, if you've got additional comments or questions, by all means, reach out to me and we can try to help you along.